Welcome back to What's on My Needles. Only this time, I'm not knitting. And I'm not actually doing fiber arts in the traditional form anyway. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of making sweaters and most of the projects I've been making over the last year and show you guys how I get the measurements that I make the patterns from and how those measurements compare to the standard measurements that are used for most knitting patterns. So I'm going to start this by saying knitting patterns have gotten a lot better over the last 20 or so years. So I bought my first book for sweater or for patterns in general in about 2003. And at that point in time, there was nothing for anyone with a bust smaller than 36 inches. And at the time, I wasn't even 30 inches. So we have gotten a lot better in that regard. The standard now is to go from an extra small to a 5X. And that is actually the standard for most knitting magazines, be them digital or actually printed. Not all of them hold to that, but more of them are pushing for it. But what this also means is independent designers don't have to do that if they're not publishing through a magazine. So if they're self-published, they don't have to do that. And all of those sizes are still based on your bust size. So if you are smaller or larger, it could affect what size you make, even if the rest of your measurements fall to a different size. So I'm going to go over a little bit more of that as well as I'm going through the measurements. But suffice to say, going through my circumference measurements along with the one point-to-point measurement that I use the most, which is shoulder point to shoulder point. I am 3 different sizes. So I'm anything from a small to a large, depending on which measurements are actually important to the design. And that's where it gets a little tricky. And that's also why, to date, I've only sold one sweater pattern. So it's not that I can't design them, it's that I design them for me. And I know I don't fit the standard measurements, and I'm working on figuring out how to take my design, make it to standard measurements, and then sell it. So it's coming. I just don't know if it's going to be in a standard format or some other way. But let's get to the measurements so you can see what I'm talking about. So here we are set up to do measurements. I am using a fabric tape measure or measuring tape. This is the kind you'd use for sewing. So not the hardware kind, that's a piece of metal. And then for one of the measurements, a straight knitting needle. In my case, double pointed. But if you have a standard knitting needle, that works as well. And I will be saying what size, according to the chart, I am according to my measurements. This one is a little on the short side to be doing an adult. So I happen to know what the ones it won't reach are, but I'll still show you how to do them. So the first one, because most knitting patterns for sweaters and tops are based on it, is the bust. So this is going even around the body, around the largest point of your bust. And then matching up the 0 to wherever that number is. In my case, that puts me at a size small. Possibly edging towards medium, but this is also a bra that makes me a bit larger, which actually means I should touch on the subject I should have touched on before. When you are doing measurements, make sure that you are wearing the undergarments that you will be wearing under the finished piece. Because some of us change sizes depending on the shapewear that we are wearing, be that Spanx or a bra or a binder or a corset if that is your style. It changes your measurements, so make sure that you actually deal with that. So wear the correct stuff. Now for the measurement on me that I use as my baseline for sweaters, tip to tip. So we all have these little bones at the end of our shoulders, and I'm going straight across my back, and I'm holding my shoulders back, so not slouched forward. I'm actually relatively good posture right now. Again, 0 on one side, I'm putting my thumbnail on the other side, and that on me, if I remember correctly, yes, I've got the chart right off screen on the bottom. That puts me at a large. Okay, so I've got a small and a large. So now let's go for the waist. Now the waist measurement is again a circumference. In this case, most of the time it means the smallest part of you. When you're sewing, it tends to mean the part that scrunches when you bend side to side. And again, following down to where that is, this puts me at a medium. Okay. And then this is the one where I knew it wouldn't make it. And that's around the largest part of your behind. And again, making it level. And on me, I happen to know that it makes me a large. So depending on what measurement is important, that will dictate what size you make if you're making one size all the way through. Now, there are a couple of measurements here that I tend to do that aren't on the list. One of them is your high hip. So most of us, it's kind of where our waistbands are for our pants. So again, matching up. And then the other one that is of interest to a lot of people, if you're doing very, very, very fitted garments, is your underbust. So that is right where your bra band is if you are wearing one. Okay? And if you are doing something with very little give, when you breathe in, the around the bust and the underbust, you should take in a deep breath when you take that measurement. So I hope that's been helpful, and I will see you next time on What's on My Needles. So as you can tell, making a sweater based purely off of the measurements on that chart, and therefore making designs based purely off of the measurements on that chart, make it a little hard. Again, we've come a long ways, and most patterns now include schematics that tell you the finished garment measurements, but that still means that there's ease involved. So unless it's stated somewhere in the pattern what the ease is supposed to be, it's a little hard as an end consumer to know what you're doing with it. That is part of why I design my own, but you should be able, with a little bit of math and your gauge swatch, or if you knit to gauge by some kind of magic, be able to figure out what alterations you need to make to the pattern to make it fit on you, or if you need to make those changes at all, if you happen to be like I am, a couple different sizes. So in general, I do a large for my upper arm through my bust, and I just realized I missed a measurement. So this one, I'm going to put it right under my armpit, hold it nice and tight. I'm going to put my measuring tape again right up on that magic spot on my shoulder, the nice little point, and measure down to the knitting needle. Still not a small there. I believe, if I remember, so I typically make a large for there. So it's just good information of knowing how you match up to the chart, and then taking that same chart and comparing it to the pattern that you're working from and figuring out what you're doing. If you're interested in how I take my numbers and turn them into a pattern, leave me a comment or leave a comment below, and I will make a video on that a bit later. So I'll see you next time on What's on My Needles.